Spinoza's Ethics, Part 2. In Book 2, Spinoza begins to trace the nature and the origin of the mind, one of the infinite things which necessarily follow from the nature of God. Although the mind is only one attribute among an infinite number, Spinoza readily admits that it concerns us most and is vitally important for ethical conduct. First, he must distinguish between an idea, a concept of the mind, and an adequate idea, one which has all the internal signs of a true idea. Such a distinction is extremely important, since from it will come the whole of the later ethical theory. For more traditional thought, God alone was considered perfect, and all the natural order somehow less perfect, as is implied by a doctrine of original sin. Spinoza takes a radical position here and actually equates reality with perfection. This departure is perfectly understandable. Nothing in nature has an alternative, or can be different from what it is, and all things are a part of God, and follow necessarily from his nature. God could not be complete without the whole natural order. Thus it is logical that each part of God, each aspect of the natural order, should be just as perfect as it is real. Then Spinoza turns to another radical idea. God is extended, or material things are a part of his nature. Christian views had to make God responsible for the creation of the physical world, and none had made God himself material, even in part. Within Spinoza's view, the material world is no longer somehow less perfect, and so it can be made a part of God without lessening his perfection. And every material thing has an idea paralleling it, although ideas affect only other ideas and physical things affect only things physical. The attribute of extension is reflected fully in the attribute of thought, although the two are only parallel and do not intersect each other. Substance thinking and substance extended are one and the same substance, now comprehended under this attribute, now under that. Nothing can happen in the body which is not perceived by the mind, and the essence of man consists of certain modifications of the attributes of God. We perceive all things through God, although some perceptions may be confused. How is such confusion as does arise to be corrected? All ideas, insofar as they related to God, are true. Thus, correct understanding means to take the idea and to place it in its proper locus within the divine nature, rather than to treat it as an independent phenomenon. No idea in itself is false. It is simply improperly related to other ideas if it is confused. For instance, men are sometimes deceived in thinking themselves to be free, but this simply reflects their ignorance of the total causal chain within the divine nature of which their actions are a part. When actions are viewed in isolation, such confusion is possible, although no idea in itself is false. It is the nature of reason to perceive things under a certain form of eternity, and to consider them as necessary. Temporal viewpoints and a belief in contingency simply reflect an unimproved reason, unable to assume its natural viewpoint. For the human mind is actually able to possess an adequate knowledge of the eternal and infinite essence of God. In many previous theological views, the human mind was thought incapable of comprehending God. For Spinoza, the human mind is to be seen as a part of the divine intellect, and as such it has within its own nature the possibility for grasping the whole of the divine mind, although to do so requires a great deal of effort. When Book 3 begins to discuss the emotions, we begin what ordinarily we would call the ethical part of the work proper. Even here, however, Spinoza's approach is not standard. He claims that no one before has determined both the nature and the strength of the emotions, or has treated the vices and follies of men in a geometrical method, and the emotions, hatred, anger, envy, follow from the same necessity as do all other things in nature. Aristotle and others thought that conduct was not amenable to scientific knowledge, but Spinoza's natural necessity, plus the connection of every event with the divine nature, subjects the emotions to the same laws as those which govern all natural phenomena. Spinoza says that we act when we are the adequate cause of anything. We suffer when we are the cause only partially. An emotion is a modification of the body's power to act. The emotion is an action, and the body's power is increased when we are the adequate cause of the modification. The emotion is passive, and the body's power of acting is decreased when we are only partially the cause. Our mind acts when it has adequate ideas. It suffers necessarily when it has inadequate ideas. The law of existence, Spinoza tells us, is that everything should do its utmost to persevere in its own mode of being. This striving is the very essence of every living thing. We feel joy when we are able to pass to a higher state of being. We feel sorrow when through passivity and suffering we pass to a lower state. Joy, sorrow, and desire are the primary emotions. Love attaches to the things which give us joy, an active and a higher existence. Hatred attaches to what gives us sorrow, a passive and a lowered existence. Naturally, we endeavour to support those things which cause joy, and just as naturally we tend to destroy whatever we imagine causes us sorrow. Love can overcome hatred, and thus increase our joy, and Spinoza recommends that we attempt to return love for hate for that reason. On the other hand, Spinoza feels that the traditional Christian virtue of humility produces impotence and sorrow, and is to be avoided for that very reason. Spinoza is often thought of as an unrestrained optimist concerning the powers of human reason, but his treatment of human bondage in Book 4 should correct any such impression. In one of the longest books in the Ethics, Spinoza outlines in detail the inevitable causes which bind men to the blindness of the emotions and work against any attempted liberation. Good and evil are defined here as, respectively, what is useful to us and what hinders us from possessing something good. Appetite is what causes us to do anything, and virtue and power are defined as being the same thing. Here we have a classical definition of a naturalistic ethical theory. If our only virtue is whatever power we possess naturally, and if good means only what is useful to us, what on earth could bind men? Spinoza says that there is no individual thing in nature, nor not surpassed in strength and power by some other thing, which means that our power is always threatened and our current well-being always subject to loss. Other things are stronger than we are, and continually challenge our powers, which places us in bondage to the passive emotions, sorrow, which necessarily accompany any such threat. The force which we have at our disposal is limited and is infinitely surpassed by the power of external causes. We suffer insofar as we find ourselves to be merely a part of nature, surpassed in power, and thus threatened by the other parts. An emotion can be restrained or removed only by an opposed and stronger emotion. Thus our ability to withstand the pressures around us, to prevent sorrow, depends upon our natural power to oppose the emotions surrounding us with an equal vigour. Such a task never ceases, and any victory is constantly in danger of being reversed in a weak or lax moment. Yet the highest virtue of the mind is said to be to know God. Why? Simply because such knowledge renders our ideas more adequate, and as our ideas become more adequate, our power of action is increased. Men disagree as far as their ideas are disturbed by emotions. When guided by reason, they tend to understand and thus to agree. So, Book 5. In Book 5, Spinoza turns finally to an appeal of the powers of the intellect. I'll start again. In Book 5, Spinoza turns finally to an appraisal of the powers of the intellect, which make it free, since freedom comes only through the possibility of increased understanding. The primary fact upon which he bases his hope for human freedom is that an emotion which is a passion, and thus destructive of our power, ceases to be a passion as soon as we form a clear idea of it. Thus we cannot prevent the constant challenge to our power to continue our existence, but we can come to understand all the causes which play upon us. To the extent to which we understand the causes impinging on us, just to that extent we can successfully oppose any threat to our freedom or our power. There is nothing of which we cannot, theoretically speaking, form an adequate idea, including, of course, God himself. The way toward increasing freedom is open and is identical with an increased understanding. Such striving toward an increase of our understanding has for its object all or part of God. This is the highest effort of the mind and its highest virtue, since it is the source of the individual's increased power of existence. Such understanding is rarely achieved and is exceedingly difficult, but its unobstructed possibility is a challenge to men and is the source of such freedom as man and woman may have. The end. Thank you for listening.